Step into almost any contemporary furniture store, and you'll find yourself surrounded by items that seem pre-programmed for obsolescence. Bookshelves that start to sag within a couple of years. Tables with veneer that peels off after a single spilled cup of coffee. Chairs that wobble and creak after only a few seasons of use. We've come to accept this as the norm, buy, break, toss, and buy again, an endless cycle of disposable convenience. But then you visit a museum, an old church, or a drafty castle. There, tucked away in a corner, you might find a wooden chest, a table, or a choir stall, crafted simply from wood. No glossy chemical finish, no plastic coating, and yet it has stood there for 8 centuries, weathering wars, floods, the rise and fall of empires, and the relentless passage of time. It hasn't rotted or crumbled. It remains solid, functional, and, frankly, beautiful. So, what explains this? How could a medieval craftsman, with just a few iron tools and 12 years of apprenticeship under a guild master, create a piece of furniture that is practically immortal? Meanwhile, our technologically advanced society churns out products almost designed to fail. They didn't have power tools or chemical preservatives concocted in a lab or industrial pressure treatments. What did they know that we've forgotten? What was their secret? Well, it's not a single magic formula. It's something far more compelling. A complete mindset, a lost wisdom that viewed wood not as a dead commodity, but as a living material to be understood and respected. The longevity of their work wasn't a happy accident. It was the result of a deep, patient collaboration with nature. They weren't merely carpenters. They were masters of their environment, and they possessed 4 fundamental secrets that transformed simple timber into something capable of defying centuries. The central thesis? A partnership with nature. Before we delve into the how, we need to shift our perspective entirely. In the modern mindset, preservation means battling nature, encasing wood under layers of plastic, a brutal shell meant to keep the world at bay. It involves injecting wood with a cocktail of chemicals like chromate copper arsenate, a toxic brew so potent that it was phased out for residential use in 2003 because the arsenic could leach into the soil. We're waging a chemical war against decay, and it's a war we consistently lose. Cracks form in our plastic shells, moisture becomes trapped underneath, and rot begins from the inside out, hidden until it's too late. Medieval craftsmen saw things differently. They understood that they could never truly defeat nature, so they chose to partner with it. Their approach wasn't a battle but a science, built on centuries of careful observation. They recognized that the elements that cause wood to rot, water, oxygen, fungi, insects, weren't enemies to be poisoned, but simply parts of a natural cycle. The secret to making something last wasn't stopping the cycle, but making the wood an unappealing habitat for the creatures that cause decay. This entire philosophy rested on a foundation of patience that is almost unimaginable today. They didn't measure projects in weeks or months, but in years, sometimes even decades. Time wasn't a cost to be cut. It was a critical ingredient, an invisible tool that strengthened the wood with each passing season. They didn't just build furniture. They curated it into existence, guiding it from living tree to permanent fixture in their world. This lost wisdom was protected by the guild system. A carpenter's apprenticeship lasted 7 years. 7 years living with a master craftsman, learning not from books but from daily observation and practice. The apprentice would start as young as 14, bound by legal contract to the master, receiving no wages, only food, shelter, and knowledge. Then came 3 more years as a journeyman, traveling from workshop to workshop across Europe, refining techniques, learning regional variations, and perfecting the craft. Only after a full decade of training could one hope to become a master, and even then, only after creating a masterpiece judged worthy by every master in the guild. It was a system designed not for efficiency, but for perfection. This wisdom can be distilled into 4 major principles, each a crucial step in the journey from forest to your floor. And it all begins not with a saw, but with a walk in the woods. It starts with the right tree. The first and most important secret is this: not all wood is created equal. A medieval carpenter would have scoffed at the idea of grabbing a generic lumber board from a giant stack at a lumberyard. For them, selecting the wood was a precise art, a decision that essentially determined the fate of the final piece before a single cut was ever made. Their choice wasn't about what was cheapest, but what was right for the job. The undisputed king of woods, especially for furniture and buildings, was oak. But not just any oak. They sought old-growth trees that had spent 50 to 100 years, sometimes even centuries, in a dense forest, growing slowly and developing incredibly tight growth rings. This dense, uniform grain wasn't just aesthetically pleasing. It made the wood far less likely to crack or split, which was essential for the intricate carving and joinery for which they were famous. Even more importantly, oak possessed a powerful built-in defense system. The heartwood, the dense, dead core of an old tree, is packed with tannins, approximately 8 to 12% tannic acid by weight. Tannic acid is a bitter compound that makes the wood unpalatable to insects and actively poisons the fungi that cause rot. They knew this instinctively, prizing the dark, heavy heartwood and often discarding the lighter, softer sapwood, the living outer layers of the tree, which are full of sugars and starches. Sapwood was essentially a free buffet for bugs and mold. Here's where modern lumber production fails from the outset. Modern forestry cuts trees at 20 to 30 years old to maximize profit and turnover. These young trees are almost entirely sapwood. Mills process the entire log, mixing the vulnerable sapwood right in with the good stuff, introducing a fatal flaw from the very beginning. Every modern lumber board is classified as durability class 5. Not durable, because it's mostly sapwood. Medieval oak heartwood? Durability class 2, meaning 15 to 40 years outdoors and centuries in a protected environment like a house or church. For pieces requiring particularly delicate carving, such as the stunning altarpieces still seen in European cathedrals, they turn to a different tree, linden wood, also called lime. Linden wood isn't as tough as oak, but it has something equally valuable: incredible dimensional stability. It's superfine. Uniform grain means it barely shrinks or swells with changes in humidity. If you're carving a face, a single crack could ruin months of work, so this stability was paramount. But the wood they chose was only half the secret. The other half was when they cut it down. They almost exclusively felled their timber in the dead of winter, typically between December and February. It was a rule passed down for generations, traditionally marked by the waning moon, just before the new moon. Medieval timber was cut during these specific periods. Whether the moon itself influenced the wood, or whether it simply marked the perfect window when trees were deepest in dormancy, is still debated by scientists today. What we do know is that recent research from Switzerland's ETH Zurich found that timber cut during these periods showed 5 to 7% better durability in weathering tests, with denser wood that resisted fungal attack more effectively. In winter, a tree is dormant. Its sap, which is essentially sugar water, has retreated deep into the roots. Harvesting wood in winter meant the timber was already low in the nutrients that fungi and insects need to survive. A tree cut in spring, bursting with sap, was a ticking time bomb of decay. The medieval carpenter didn't need to understand why. 2,000 years of observation, passed down through guild traditions and documented by Julius Caesar, Pliny the Elder, and countless medieval manuscripts, told them when, and the results speak for themselves. By working with the forest's natural cycles, they started the preservation process before the wood even reached the workshop. It was a profound act of ecological wisdom that modern year-round logging has completely abandoned. Once they had the perfect winter-felled log, the medieval craftsman's most powerful tool came into play: patience. Using fresh, green wood for furniture was unthinkable. A fresh log is saturated with water, sometimes more than half its weight. Building with it would be self-sabotage. As the water evaporates, the wood shrinks, twists, and warps. A table would collapse. A chest would split wide open. The wood had to be seasoned, and their method was a masterclass in letting nature do the work. The most common technique was air drying. The logs were brought to a seasoning shed, covered to keep rain off but open on the sides for airflow. They were stacked on stones to keep them off the damp ground, with thin sticks, called stickers, placed between each layer so air could circulate around every surface. And then they waited for years. A 1-inch thick oak board might take a year to season. A massive beam for a cathedral roof might sit there for a decade. Building contracts from the 14th century show that clients were expected to provide the timber years in advance. During this long, slow process, the moisture evaporated gradually and evenly. The wood fibers condensed, the resins hardened, and the internal stresses were gently relieved. The wood didn't just dry, it settled, finding its final, stable form. This is the polar opposite of modern kiln drying, where we force wood to dry in days inside giant ovens. That violent, rapid process creates brittle wood and locks in huge stresses. It's like baking a cake at double the temperature for half the time. The outside looks done, but the inside is a gooey mess. But air drying wasn't their only trick. For certain jobs, they used a much more mysterious method: water seasoning. It sounds completely insane, right? To preserve wood from moisture, you first sink it in water. Logs were often chained together and left at the bottom of a river or pond for months, sometimes years. The 15th century architect Leon Battista Alberti wrote about this, noting that it made the wood more stable and easier to work. They might not have understood the microbiology, but their observations were spot on. The running water slowly washed away the starches and sugars in the sap, the main food source for fungi and wood-boring insects. They were essentially starving the enemy before the battle even began. When the log was finally pulled out, it was left with a pure cellulose structure that was far less attractive to pests. The wood also emerged darker and denser, with enhanced natural resistance. The wooden piles that have held up the city of Venice for centuries are a testament to this technique. The water, by blocking oxygen, prevents decay while cleaning the wood from the inside out. After its long bath, the timber was then air-dried, resulting in wood that was even harder and more rot-resistant. With wood that was perfectly chosen and patiently seasoned, the craftsmen moved to the third stage, creating a protective shield. But their idea of a shield was very different from ours. Modern finishes like polyurethane are surface coatings, forming a thin plastic film over the wood. The problem is that the barrier is imperfect. It scratches, it cracks, and when it fails, it traps moisture underneath, creating a perfect greenhouse for mold. The medieval approach was the opposite. It wasn't about sealing the surface, but about fortifying the wood from within. Their treatments were penetrating finishes, designed to soak deep into the fibers and become part of the wood itself. One of the most dramatic techniques was a trial by fire. Craftsmen would use controlled charring, lightly scorching the surface of the wood. This principle of fire hardening wood was known across medieval Europe, and we see it perfected today in the Japanese technique of shosugiban. The fire burns away the soft, sugary outer fibers, leaving a sterile layer of carbon. This char is naturally resistant to water, tastes awful to insects, and is even somewhat fire-resistant because it has already burned. After charring, or sometimes instead of it, came preservative oils and resins. The king of these was pine tar. This was a huge industry, especially for societies like the Vikings. The tar, a thick black substance rendered from pine stumps, was heated up and rubbed onto the wood. The heat helped the tar penetrate deep into the pores, where its natural compounds acted as a poison to fungi and a barrier to insects. But their real genius was in combining ingredients. One of the most powerful lost formulas was a 3-part mixture. First was pine tar, for its antifungal properties. This was often mixed with boiled linseed oil. Linseed oil soaks deep into the wood, but its real magic is that it hardens when exposed to air. This oil contains linolenic acid, which polymerizes when exposed to oxygen, transforming from liquid to solid within the wood fibers themselves. It didn't just coat the fibers, it solidified within them, adding strength and locking the pine tar in place. The final ingredient was often beeswax. The wax provided a renewable, water-repellent barrier on the surface, but it was still microporous, allowing the wood to breathe. This 3-part system, a fungicide carried by a hardening oil, sealed with a breathable wax, was a work of chemical genius achieved with all natural materials. In other regions, craftsmen adapted. Animal fats were common, sometimes mixed with charcoal dust or alkaline wood ash to create what you could call a medieval superfat. There's even some evidence that, for certain applications, wood was soaked in vinegar to kill any latent mold spores before being sealed with oil, creating another durable defense. It's believed that some monastery furniture treated with similar methods has survived over 400 years of continuous use. If you're finding value in these lost techniques that modern science is only now beginning to understand, a quick like on this video helps us reach more people who care about craftsmanship and durability. We genuinely appreciate you being here. The three ingredients at the heart of their most powerful formula each served a distinct purpose. Together, they created something that no single ingredient could achieve alone, a complete defense system that has preserved wood for 8 centuries. Let's examine each component, because what the lumber industry sells you today is a cheap imitation of the real thing, and understanding why matters if you want wood that actually lasts. Before we begin, let's take a closer look at the 3 key ingredients. Understanding why they work is the first step. This isn't just a recipe, it's a formulation based on centuries of trial and error. First, the backbone of the formula, pine tar. Real pine tar is liquid gold for wood. It's made by distilling the resin from pine stumps and roots, where it's most concentrated. For centuries, this was the king of marine wood preservation. Pine tar, also called Stockholm tar, was Sweden's largest export from 1648 to the early 20th century. It was essential to naval and merchant shipping concerns all over the world. When you smell real pine tar, it has an incredibly potent, smoky, campfire-like aroma. That smell tells you it's full of powerful organic compounds. It works on multiple levels. It's profoundly hydrophobic, so it repels water. But the real magic is that it's naturally antiseptic and fungicidal. The same compounds that protect a living pine tree get concentrated in the tar. When applied to wood, it makes it an awful place for the fungi that cause rot and the insects that want to eat it. It's our heavy-duty protector. Second, the heart of the mixture, boiled linseed oil. If pine tar is the shield, boiled linseed oil is the soul. Its key property is its ability to polymerize or cure. When applied to wood, the wood just drinks it in. It travels deep into the porous structure. Then, over days, it reacts with oxygen and hardens from a liquid into a solid, resilient substance inside the wood itself. This is what gives the finished piece its inner glow and a huge measure of its durability. But here's something the industry doesn't want you to know. The boiled linseed oil sold at big box stores like Home Depot or Lowe's isn't actually boiled. They sell raw linseed oil with cheap metallic oxidizers added to speed up drying. It's labeled as boiled, but no boiling ever took place. The medieval masters really boiled the oil, a completely different process that creates a superior product. True boiled linseed oil can be found from Swedish manufacturers like Odison, who still do it the traditional way. It's important to use boiled linseed oil, not raw. Raw linseed oil can take months to cure if it ever does, leaving a sticky mess. The boiled version contains additives that dramatically speed up that curing process, making it practical. And third, the final seal, beeswax. Beeswax is one of nature's most perfect materials. To make it usable as a wood finish, it's dissolved in a solvent. We'll be using turpentine, which is itself derived from pine resin, making it a perfect partner. Once it's a soft paste, the beeswax functions as the final armor. After the pine tar and linseed oil do their deep penetrating work, the beeswax is buffed over the top. It fills any remaining microscopic pores and leaves behind a thin, tough, waxy film. This film is highly water-resistant. Water just beads up and rolls off. It also gives the wood a beautiful, low-luster sheen that feels wonderful to the touch. It's the perfect final seal on the system. Together, these three create a synergy that is far more powerful than any one of them alone. The linseed oil carries the pine tar deep into the wood. It then hardens, locking the pine tar in place. Finally, the beeswax provides a renewable surface barrier that repels water. It's a complete, multi-layered defense system created entirely from natural, time-tested materials. The final secret has less to do with how the wood was treated and more with how it was assembled and where it lived. Smart construction and the right environment were the unseen guardians of this furniture. First, the construction itself was a form of preservation. Medieval joiners were masters of the mortise and tenon joint. This is where a peg on one piece of wood fits into a hole on another. But they didn't stop there. They used a technique so clever that many modern woodworkers have forgotten it exists: draw boring. Here's how it worked. The craftsman would drill a hole straight through the mortise. Then, critically, he would drill the corresponding hole in the tenon slightly offset, just 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch closer to the shoulder. When a tapered wooden peg was driven through these misaligned holes, something remarkable happened. The wood compressed, the peg bent slightly inside the joint, and as it did, it pulled the tenon deeper into the mortise with tremendous force, clamping the shoulder tight against the adjoining piece. This wasn't temporary, it was permanent. The peg remained under constant tension, holding everything together even without glue. Medieval furniture often used this technique alone, no adhesive at all, and the joints grew tighter over the centuries as the wood settled and aged. Modern tests have shown that drawboard joints can remain solid even when the fit is somewhat sloppy. The mechanical interlock compensates for imperfections. It's self-correcting joinery, brilliant in its simplicity, and it's the reason an 800-year-old chest can still be lifted by its handles without falling apart. Some craftsmen even used the drying process to their advantage, fitting a dry tenon into a slightly greener mortise. As the mortise dried and shrank, it clamped down on the tenon, creating a joint that literally got stronger over time. Modern furniture, held rigid with glue and screws, fights the wood's natural seasonal movement until something, the glue or the wood itself, cracks under the pressure. Second, the environment played a huge role. A medieval castle or a stone cathedral, with its thick walls and lack of central heating, was a remarkably stable place. Temperatures and humidity changed slowly, seasonally, not drastically from hour to hour like in our homes. The punishing cycle of a furnace blasting dry heat in winter, followed by an air conditioner in summer, is incredibly harsh on wood. The stable, cool conditions of a medieval hall were far gentler. Finally, there was a culture of care that we've completely lost. Furniture was rare and valuable. A good chest was a major family asset, passed down through generations. It was an heirloom, not a disposable good. This meant it was cared for periodically. Rubbing it down with wax wasn't just cleaning, it was maintenance. It renewed the protective layer and kept the wood from drying out. Any small issue could be spotted and fixed immediately. The furniture wasn't just used, it was tended to, too. Rediscovering these methods isn't just a history lesson, it's a treasure map. It points toward a more sustainable and durable way of making things, a way that partners with nature instead of fighting it. Honestly, it feels more relevant today than ever. If you're as fascinated by this lost wisdom as we are, and you believe that craftsmanship and durability are things worth reviving, then subscribe to our channel. We explore forgotten techniques, ancient technology, and the time-tested secrets that modern science is only now beginning to truly understand. Join us as we keep uncovering the genius of the past. So, why does an 800-year-old chest stay solid while a modern bookshelf falls apart? The answer isn't one thing. It's everything. It's the result of a forgotten philosophy. The numbers tell the story. Oak hardwood, properly selected and seasoned, lasts 40 years outdoors, centuries indoors. Modern particle board lasts 3 to 5 years before catastrophic failure. Medieval apprenticeship involved 12 years of rigorous training under guild masters. Modern furniture assembly takes 30 minutes with an Allen wrench and a prayer. We didn't lose these techniques because they stopped working. We lost them because speed became more valuable than permanence. It started with the wisdom of selection, choosing slow-grown, winter-felled heartwood that was already packed with nature's own defenses. It continued with the art of patience, letting that wood season for years in the air or under the water until it reached a state of perfect stability. It was then armed with nature's own armor, not. Here's the translated and rewritten text, incorporating the interpret and clarify style with a touch of creative expansion. It wasn't just a plastic shell, it was a profound, penetrating defense against the ravages of fire, the corrosive effects of tar, the saturation of oils, and the degradation caused by waxes. And crucially, it was fused with ingenious engineering, the thoughtful designs, the precisely fitted mortise and tenon joints that, incredibly, grew stronger and more steadfast as time passed. These joints were meticulously crafted to move with the wood, accommodating its natural tendencies, rather than fighting against them. All of this was sustained by a calm, predictable environment and a cultural mindset that prioritized careful craftsmanship over fleeting convenience. This represented a single, unbroken lineage of knowledge, where each step in the process bolstered and reinforced the others in a synergistic way. The medieval craftsman possessed a deep understanding that the very essence, the spirit, of the tree continued to reside within the timber, even after it was felled. And to ensure its longevity and enduring beauty, one had to respect and honor that inherent spirit. What we've genuinely forfeited isn't merely a collection of techniques and skills. We have lost a way of thinking, a fundamental philosophy. We have exchanged the profound, nuanced knowledge of the artisan for the raw, unfeeling efficiency of the factory assembly line. We've traded the patience that nurtures the creation of lasting heirlooms for the relentless speed that fuels a never-ending cycle of consumption and disposability. When you reach out and touch a piece of furniture that stood for 8 centuries, you're not simply feeling the texture of wood. You're making contact with a fundamentally different relationship with time itself, a perception now largely foreign to us. You are experiencing tangible, physical evidence of a culture that purposefully built things for the benefit of their grandchildren's grandchildren, a society with a long-term vision. It was a world where the highest value wasn't assigned to that which was novel or trendy, but rather to that which possessed the capacity to endure, to stand the test of time. And in our modern world, saturated with disposable goods designed for obsolescence, that commitment to longevity is, perhaps, the most potent and valuable secret of all.